From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on Can TV. I am Ken Davis welcoming you, and I'm glad you're along for another conversation about the city in which we all live and the city to which most of us have some feelings of affection. Some days, many days, we hope. And you know, the last couple of weeks we've been starting the show with, it's just happened that we've been starting the show with numbers and statistics, mostly because they've been pretty grim. How many people have been shot? How many people have died in Chicago over this horrible, violent year in Chicago? Well, tonight the mayor is going to, as we're speaking on Thursday morning, the mayor is going to have a big address on violence and violence prevention, and we will be talking about that on the show. So I thought we'd assemble some great wisdom around the table today, people who have observed these things and talked about them for a long time. And I'm very honored to say Dahleen Glanton is joining us for the first time from the Chicago Tribune.
Thank you for having me.
Dahleen, it's great to have you here. Thanks for doing this. And our old friend Glenn Reedus is back, independent journalist, and it must be said, a former editor of The Defender.
And The Crusader.
And The Crusader. So people who've been around Chicago for a while have had the opportunity to observe this city, its politics, its culture, its history, and all that. And we want to try to put it into some of that perspective. How long have you been a columnist at the Tribune? I'm sorry for not knowing that.
Oh, full time, just this year.
Just this year,
But
okay.
I've been at the Tribune for over almost 30 years.
Yeah, so then I don't have to feel so guilty about not knowing this, because I started noticing some of your work, your opinion pieces, and thinking, this is weird, because you know she's a reporter. I mean, I've been following it, and so that explains it then. So you got that designation this year.
Yes.
And may I say, you've used it well. You've written some really fine pieces.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be able to talk about that. Let's begin because you know the mayor is supposedly announcing tonight, but he let his police chief have the big announcement yesterday that there are going to be 970 new police officers added to the force. We can get into the details about that, but in general, good idea, bad idea? Will it help Chicago?
It won't help it won't help the situation we're looking at right now, because the 970 won't even begin to come on board until January. Then you've got a 6-month training in the academy for each of them. In the meantime, you've got cops who are retiring or shifting to another job. I don't see it doing anything right now.
You know, it'll just be interesting to see if there is a redeployment of some of the officers that we already have in the meantime. Mm-hmm. Certainly that's something that's been talked about. And one of the things that I'm excited about, though, is the fact that we are looking ahead and that we realize that this is a problem that's not going to go away overnight. And we have to put some resources into this to make sure we address it in the long term.
Obviously, we've been talking about this for years. I mean, as long as Rahm Emanuel's been mayor, we've been kicking this one around about, do we have enough police officers? Is that the source of the problem, or is it the answer to the problem? But I mean, Glenn, you're saying that it's not going to help because it's going to take a long time. It's going to take till 2018 to phase it in. But are you happy that he appears to have really essentially done a 180 on his policy about not needing more police officers?
I don't think it's a 180 because he hasn't talked about how he's going to pay for it. Mm-hmm. We're a broke city. New taxes are going toward pensions. Mm-hmm. You really can't tax residents anymore. Where's the money going to come from? I think that when he was talking about 500 cops, the tab was going to be $50 million. So now we're close to what, 100 million?
Well, I think 137 is the number I saw.
From a broke city?
Yeah.
I just don't see it happening. It sounds good, but I'd be excited if he said, we're bringing in 970 cops over the next 2 years, mm-hmm. and this is how we're going to pay for it. I mean, don't believe as citizens, as residents, even sometimes as aldermen, there's enough attention paid to the budget. That's the root of it all.
Yeah.
But it's very risky for the mayor, who has such a very low approval rating in the city, to make that kind of promise without some kind of way to pay for it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I don't know where the money's coming from.
But
either.
remember, he said that he was going to, he was restructuring one of the pension plans with the support. He was going to get support from Springfield. That never came.
That's that 208 million or
So,
whatever that's still hanging out there. Yeah.
Why isn't this in
Yeah.
that,
Well,
that
there
same
is
ballpark?
one thing that I haven't seen dealt with in any of the reporting so far today, and that is that last year, in 2015, we spent $116 million in overtime for police officers, right? Now, presumably, obviously, that's not all going to go away, but some of that hopefully could be redirected into the pot for the new hires, right? I mean, that just would seem logical to me, although budgeting is something I don't understand, so who knows? But
And it certainly would make more sense to do that. I mean, with the overtime, the officers are overworked, and with the stress levels that are already out there, that certainly has not been a good thing for the city. So if we could redirect that money, that would certainly, I think, make people happy.
You know, another thought that just sort of occurred to me when I was looking at this is that of the new applicants, and there's a huge pool of people who've applied to be police officers, the ones who've qualified, who could be allowed into the process to go into training, into the academy, 71% are minorities. So, I mean, if nothing else, it will change something about the police force, right? It'll
there was
increase,
a push,
yeah.
last year and a half
Yeah.
ago, there was a push to get more African American and Latino applicants. So apparently that's paid off. I mean, because being a cop is a great career.
It sure is. I mean, it's obviously dangerous and all those other things we talk about, but it's also pretty lucrative because, you know, it's what is the starting pay is 60 grand or something,
Right.
I think. So, you know, it's a decent middle class job if you have the aptitude for it. But I mean, I think one of the things that we always talk about is this kind of like this whole sort of racial sensitivity issue of having a police force that is still dominantly white. And this might be a very interesting way to begin to change it, because over the next couple of years there's going to be more and more attrition. So the color, perhaps the temperament of the department will change.
You know, it's interesting that people say that, but I think one of the most important elements is that the training. And I don't care what race you are, you have to know how to deal with these kinds of situations, because African American cops are kind of under the same pressure as white cops, and you know, there have been some shootings involving some, you know, minority cops.
Yeah.
So to me, the key has to be to make sure that these cops get the proper support and the proper training to be able to do their jobs.
I couldn't agree with that more. It's really, I mean, we can't be altruistic about black cops in black neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise we would not have had all the attention with Glenn Evans
Right.
and some others. But, you know, the training is key. I remember when I lived in Michigan, and the first time I got stopped by a Michigan State police officer, I was ready to confess to anything. I mean, because the guy was just that polite. You know, and
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
but
Okay, yeah.
you know, my experiences with Chicago police officers has been anything but.
Yeah.
You know, they're just so many of them believe that the gruff personality is the way that the job has to be.
That's how you get it.
Because that's the culture of this police department.
Well, I mean, I know we've kind of beaten this horse so much about training, but it does seem like if they can't do something about changing the nature of the training, then you could hire 5,000 more cops, and you're not going to change the root of the problem. And I did notice that he's talking about. let's see, what is it? That's 100 new recruits a month, and at least 200 of these are going to be detectives. They're going to be well. It's not that they're not going to hire 200 people, but they're as they bring new people in. I guess detective is a promotion, right, from street cop, I guess.
Oh no, you can be a detective and pretty much the same as a street cop.
Oh, you can?
Yeah, it's generally about pay.
Well, however they're going to do it, they're planning to end up with 200 more detectives by 2018 to bring the detective ranks back up to about where they were. And that seems to me like another one of these things. It's like you got the training piece, and you got this thing about we just have way fewer detectives than we used to have. So the clearance rate is just abysmal.
It's less than 30%.
Yeah.
And there was a story.
I should say by clearance rate, we mean
solve the crime.
Solving the crime, right? Excuse
and
me
there was a story about 3 weeks ago where one of the detectives was quoted in the Trib as saying, "We don't have time to properly investigate because we get one assignment and we're halfway through that investigation, then we get another, and we've got to start the new one."
I mean, am I putting too much on this? Is it important, this thing about the clearance rate? I mean, would it be significant if we could get the clearance rate up to like 70%? Would it make a difference?
I certainly think so. One of the things that we know about some of these offenders is that they're repeat offenders. And especially with the gun situation. So yeah, I mean, if you can lock up someone who's been involved in a shooting before, get that person off the street, then of course it's going to impact the numbers in the long run, I think.
The other thing I think is that when you have a higher clearance rate, then the perpetrators don't feel like I'm going to get away with it because I got away with these last three.
That's right.
And they don't look at the law of averages catching up with them.
I don't know why this thought never penetrated my dense little brain before just now, but we've talked about this thing about predictive policing, and everybody's on the database and everything. And well, maybe you wouldn't need to rely so much on databases and laptops if you had a better clearance rate, right? Because these guys wouldn't be on your list. They would be in some kind of treatment or remediation, or they'd be in prison wherever they belonged if you could solve some of these crimes.
One of the things I think we forget is how smart these guys are. I mean, they watch what is happening in this city. They know that the police are not making as many arrests. They know that people are not, crimes are not being solved. And so Glenn is exactly right. They know they can get away with these things. So there is no reason to stop because you're not going to get caught. And that's frightening to me.
When I worked on King Drive and across the street from what they call O Block, which is supposed to be the most dangerous block in the city, cops would park in the middle of King Drive, but they never found anything on the guys who were just hanging out because they knew that they knew almost what time the cops were going to come and start with the contact cards and frisking and all that, but they could go a half a block away and get their gun if they wanted to. I mean, she's absolutely right. We underestimate the intelligence of criminals too often.
So I don't know. We can kind of move on from this, but I'm really fascinated by this thing about this debate that's just been going on forever about whether the answer is paying for more police officers, and I guess I've kind of come to the conclusion that yes, it would be nice, but I don't think that we should think that that's going to solve our problem. It's just one piece of a really complicated puzzle. Now, the mayor is also talking about, and I do not understand this, I hope he's going to make this a little bit clearer tonight, every child, quote unquote, will have a mentor. And these will be in the 20, quote unquote, most violent crime areas. I don't know how that's going to work, and who are these people, and how are we going to pay them, and who are these mentors going to be?
He's talking about expanding the BAM program. and which is a very effective program that we've seen work in a lot of schools in the city. And I would not be surprised if he has gotten some private money to help pay for expanding that program, and that coupled with some, city funds, because I think he finally is understanding that policing alone is not going to solve this problem, that there are also some social issues that have to be addressed. And this mentoring program for young, I think the BAM program is for, 8th, 9th, and 10th graders?
Right.
And so it not only mentors, but gives them some hope for, being able to do something better in the future. So I think all of those things, the combination of those things are good.
It's helpful. The putting some resources to BAM, I think is helpful. At the same time, I don't know if kids who are seeking, boys who are seeking mentoring are the ones who are out in the street doing the dirt. And then you give that select group mentors, but what about the older folks? And I've talked about ceasefire incessantly. I love ceasefire. That's where big chunks of money need to go, because you can get an immediate impact. You can address those individuals who are beyond BAM age and who are doing probably much worse things than any of the BAM mentees have thought about. And I think the city should, and the mayor should be looking hard at putting dollars there, because it's proven. I mean, there's tons of data that shows that ceasefire works, and operations like that. In Oakland, California, I'm sorry, it's Richmond, California. There's a program called Neighborhood Safety Operation. And what they did was something similar to Chicago in tracking the people who were doing the shootings. And I think it was only 17 guys or 21 guys who were responsible for 70% of the shootings. They brought them all in to one place and said, we'll pay you to get a GED, we'll pay you to go to counseling, we'll pay for child support, you've got to commit to stop shooting. They've had a tremendous reduction. I mean, people are critical saying you shouldn't pay people for that, but you're saving lives. I think that in Chicago we really need to look around the country and see what's working, because we tend to believe that we're Chicago and we have all the answers.
We've got all the answers. Yes, indeed we do. So the mayor is speaking tonight, and we have a pretty good idea he's going to talk about some of these things. One of the most controversial aspects, though, is that he was going to do this speech on Tuesday. And part of the reason why I booked the show and asked you guys to come was because I thought we could sit here 2 days later and talk about, what we think of the speech. He moved it to today, and the reason seems to be because there was a lot of pushback to some of the things that he was going to say, right? I mean, do you understand what happened there?
And rightfully so. I mean, the last thing we need is for Mayor Emanuel to come out and start talking about absentee fathers. Of course, it was another newspaper that said he was going to do that. I think he was floating the idea to see what the response would be before he actually did it. It's not clear what he's going to say tonight. But first of all, who is he talking to? Because, I mean, if the fathers that he's addressing are not the ones who are going to pay any attention to him. Right. So is he doing this to appease a certain constituency, which doesn't do anything to help the problem?
You mean those white folks?
Yes. So, that was one of my biggest problems with it, and we don't need to hear it from him.
Absolutely, and as the lawyers say, he has no standing. What does he really know about black dads? I mean, what's the kid? Chance, the rapper's father, used to work for Ken Bennett. He used to work for him. But what does he know about the father on 15th and Colin or 63rd and Woodlawn.
So, if I may, as the white guy at the table, delicately, do you think it's an issue that needs to be more publicly discussed, if not by this mayor? I mean, is it a major piece of this issue?
It gets discussed in-house. Black people talk about it, but it's fortunately, in my opinion, it's one of those things that folks don't run around the city waving a flag, so everybody gets to participate. I think you have to understand some of the dynamics. I mean, live the dynamics of the black community before, and there's more than one, of course, before you can just go out and start proclaiming, you know, what's wrong, because there's a huge number of elements. You know, there's the inability to get a job because of something that happened in the past. There are substandard services. There's substandard products in your community. You live in the city, the jobs are in the suburbs, you don't have a way to get to the suburbs. There's just no one or two things you can put your finger on and say, this is what's wrong.
And here's the other problem with that. You have to also decide, is it that you want the father in the house and not doing anything? Or are you going to bring another element with that, which would be job training, things like that? If you're talking about having more fathers in the home, they need to be able to support the family. And you can't, and a lot of young men aren't able to do that because they don't have the support systems in place to do that.
Exactly.
Same old thing, right? Everything is related to everything, and they all stack on top of each other. And then you can look at this one thing that happens. There are many, 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 many families that don't have a father in it. And you can say, let's tackle that. But if you don't tackle it without figuring out why that happened,
it's an easy target.
You know, and the dynamics of the community are different, not just in the black community, but 25 years ago, there was a stigma to having a child and you weren't married or you weren't even thinking of marriage. Now it's very much accepted. So you've got, there's a child in the house without a dad, but there was never intended to be a dad in the picture.
yeah.
So
And
you have to take that into consideration as well.
And their grandfathers and uncles, and I mean, we have a lot of extended families in our communities, and that's a dynamic that I think needs to be considered as well. And one other thing I'd like to say about that is, first of all, there's an inaccurate depiction of black men not being present in their children's lives. That's absolutely not true. The CDC did a study recently, and it found that though black men might not be living in the home, that they tend to be more active than some other groups as far as interacting with their children on a regular basis. So that's something I think we need to consider as well.
An interesting point. And of course, there's the education piece too, that, I mean, I think there are plenty of people who say that a kid will learn better if a kid has two parents at home, or at least the feeling of a more complete family. I don't know, do you buy any of that?
I don't know, Tyshawn Lee's dad was in his life. Was that a good example?
Sure.
I mean, he may have been better off if he hadn't been.
Yeah.
So.
The thing I wanted to, one last thing I really wanted to get in here was this thing about mandatory de-escalation training. This is something that the mayor is pushing and is going to talk about, we think he's going to talk about tonight with the police department. Reactions?
It's a joke.
Okay. You think so too, Dahleen?
I'm not as certain that it's a joke as Glenn is.
2 days of training. This is not about these guys not knowing how to speak to people. This is about these guys who grew up in a place where black folks were looked down upon. and they carried that with them.
So it's a generational thing? I mean,
No,
will
not-
the younger,
no.
younger recruits maybe not have those biases?
Some, but I don't think that you can train. I mean, everybody agrees it takes 28 days to change a habit. So 2 days, what's that going to be? 16 hours, and suddenly you're going to talk to people calmly because you've gone through this training, and they're having
Don't
an
let him
episode.
bully you.
Well, you know, I think that cops will do what they have to do, and I think once it's very clear that we're not going to tolerate that old behavior, then they'll figure out how to do it in 2 days. You know, because it's not that hard to do.
Oh, the training isn't hard to do, but for the training to be effective, and how do you pay for it?
All right, well,
I mean, that's why they stopped it earlier, because they ran out of money.
But it circles back to what we were talking about before, though. We all seem to agree that training is one of the biggest issues that the police department faces, right? And if you're going to train police, de-escalation would seem to be a really important aspect. And I say that because I'm sure you guys are the same way. I sat for hours watching those 9 videos of the, oh my God, I just forgot his name, the guy who was shot.
Laquan McDonald?
No, the most recent one.
Oh, Paul O'Neill.
Paul O'Neill, thank you. The Paul O'Neill shooting, and what, you know, who am I to say? I'm just some idiot who has a talk show on CAN TV. But just watching this video, the sense I got of it was that it was pretty chaotic, and that there really wasn't a lot of coordination, and they clearly, even the police superintendent said they made a lot of mistakes. So you look at this and you say, wow, there really is a need for really extensive training or retraining here.
But is that de-escalation?
Well, I don't know.
Crisis training?
I guess what I'm saying is,
I think that's what we need. You know what this reminds me of? I covered the concealed carry law for the Tribune and went to a lot of the training sessions where people got their licenses. And one of the most important things that they talked about in those sessions was how you get so nervous and your body reacts to the stress of the situation when you're confronted and you need to figure out whether to use your gun. Now, they were teaching civilians how to deal with that. It seems to me that they also need to teach the cops how to deal with that. Now, that's something we assume the cops already knew, but maybe they don't, because most of these situations are situations where they just appear not to be thinking clearly and are reactionary.
Glenn, I know you want to get in, but I just have to say one thing that, again, just being this junkie who sat and watched all these videos, there is the one video of the guys who are, they know they're chasing after a stolen car, and they come down and they turn the corner and they're speeding up this block, and before you know it, they realize that this guy is actually coming at them, and they have this head-on collision. And you see all this on the dash cam. I mean, it's just like you're sitting in that car. And they freak out and they jump out, and the guy's got his gun as he gets out. Now, there's all kinds of problems with that, but these are younger guys, as far as I know. They're less experienced. They just were in a head-on collision, and they're jumping out of the car with the gun ready, and they think they've got some kind of dangerous criminal, whether they do or not. How do you train for that? I mean, isn't that something you can only learn from being on the force for 20 years? I mean, I just don't know. I don't understand how that works.
You know, you can, I just read this a week or so ago in a discussion about the FOP contract, that in essence, you can leave the academy and retire with no additional training in those 25,
Nothing in between?
25, there's nothing mandatory.
Really?
There's, I think, a certification for shooting, but no mandatory training on how to interact with the public.
Wow, that's interesting.
So, so you know, de-escalation, I mean, that's this de-escalation thing, that's like instead of driver training, you teach the person how to change tires.
Yeah. Did I cut you off before you were? I think you were in the middle of something, and I just got all verbal. You have written, Dahleen, some absolutely wonderful and kind of stirring stuff in your column, and I really want to encourage people to go to the Tribune and just put Dahleen Glanton in the search box, and up will come dozens of things that you've written recently. But September 7th, this is too much to read, but I'm just going to kind of skip through. I literally printed this out this morning because I thought it was so important. If you don't mind somebody reading your column back to you.
Fine.
It should be clear by now that no one is coming to our rescue. African Americans have demanded that our police keep us safe. They can't. We've begged our elected officials to invest in our neighborhoods with jobs. They won't. We've lain down in the streets in protest, pleading for our men to stop killing each other. They don't. Mayor Emanuel, Police Superintendent Johnson, and State's Attorney Anita Alvarez have talked about the revolving door of criminals who commit gun crimes, go to prison for a short period, and hit the streets again packing illegal firearms. African Americans have good reason not to trust everything these people say. But this is worth a listen. Mandatory sentencing is a touchy subject for many African Americans who fear, justifiably so, that there would be a disproportionate negative impact on blacks. But don't the repeat offenders responsible for this astounding murder rate of African Americans cause just as much harm? Expand on that.
Well, see, I think there has to be a midway point, a middle point on this. I am just as concerned as everyone else about young people getting trapped in this cycle of prison. I don't think that's a good thing. But isn't there some way where we could say, after the first or even maybe the second offense, that you go to jail for the maximum if you're caught with an illegal gun? I don't know why that would be a problem. I mean, maybe someone else does, but to me, if you want to get these repeat offenders off the street, you have to do that. Now, for the young people and anybody else who needs it after that first offense, maybe there's counseling, maybe there's intervention, maybe there's whatever it is you might want to participate in. Mm-hmm. But if you keep doing it, you need to go to jail. And I don't see why that's an issue.
Is it your sense that the laws are not, what's the word, punitive enough, strict enough at this point?
Well, the judges, don't normally sentence people to more than a year, and they're back out on the streets.
And why is that? That's one of the great questions.
Yeah,
why is that?
Yeah.
I mean, are you saying that judges are just, what, they're not?
Well, there are a lot of things going on. I mean, there's overcrowding in the system and things like that. So, to be honest, I'm not sure what's going on with the judges.
So you'd be in favor of mandatories then, which in essence kind of bypasses the judges. It almost like short circuits them.
After maybe the first offense, yes, I would be willing to at least talk about that.
So that's where you draw the line. There has to be like you get like one shot at this.
Yeah.
Maybe even 1.5 or something. But then after that,
right,
we're done with you.
Right.
I think too, though, it's very much like our elections. We pay so much attention to presidential elections. We pay so much attention to aldermanic elections. And state reps and state senators just slide along. Nobody's whistling at them saying, hey, how you doing? Nothing. What Dahleen is saying, I'm pretty sure is in effect in a couple of states already. I believe California and Michigan, that you don't even get that half a chance. You commit a crime, and it doesn't have to be an illegal gun. You commit a crime with a gun, they tack on some years to your sentence.
We already have that though, right, in Illinois?
I don't know that it's. I don't think we do.
But I mean, it was a coalition kind of led by African American lawmakers who fought that.
Right.
And they fought it because their politics are that we already lock up too many young black men as it is, and the solution to our problems is not to just continue to decimate our community by taking our young black men and just throwing them in jail, where they will, if they ever get out, they will be worse than they were when we put them in. I mean, that was their argument.
Absolutely, and there's some truth to that. And I mean, that's not something that we can ignore. I also wrote recently about the heroin epidemic and how
comparing the suburban.
Yeah,
yes,
I mean, when that actually became a white suburban problem, our state legislators decided to handle it very differently. So
they created a task force.
They created a task force, and they basically made the, what is it, the drug that.
There's a drug that combats the effects of heroin.
Overdose. You can now go and buy that, at the drugstore without a prescription. So, and across the country, we've seen the laws become less strict when it involves heroin. And people are asking, why don't we look at Chicago's violence problem that same way, where our kids treat it differently? So you can't dismiss the fact that, it would be a problem for a lot of our young people. But I think as African Americans, we have to decide how much are we going to take and what are we willing to give up to make this stop, because this is disproportionately affecting our community. We have to give up something, and we have to decide how far we're willing to go to put an end to this.
And it is interesting that we all seem to agree that it's a relatively small number of people, right? I mean, it might be as small as in the hundreds. It might be fewer than 1,000. I don't know what it is, but it's not the entire community shooting itself. It's a small number of people. So what you're saying is, in tough times, you have to make tough decisions.
You do. I mean, we're losing a whole generation of young men, and they're recruiting younger kids. And that's why I think expanding the BAM program is so important, because these kids are getting involved in this younger and younger. So
we've lost 500 people. Well, I mean, we've had many horrible injuries to thousands of people, but 500 people have died this year, and the overwhelming majority of them are black.
Absolutely.
And so you could almost argue that the price of, how we want to put this, the price of protecting the rights of the people who are committing the crimes is that we've lost almost as many innocents. Well, they're not all innocents, but we've lost a lot of innocents. Almost the same kind of number as the number of people who are committing the crimes. So that's an interesting argument. It's an interesting argument to put it that way.
I think that you've got to do what Dahleen said. There isn't a room. There's not room for debate, because you're talking when you say innocence. I mean, you're talking about children. I mean, babies,
right,
and grandparents.
I just didn't want to say that all the people who've died this year have been innocents, because obviously some of it is just shootouts.
Some were shooting
gang
back,
rivals.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, I think we've run out of options as to how do you address this, and it's going to take the legislature, it's going to take the cops, and it's going to take, but most of all, the community. I did a story several months ago about policing black cops in the 70s and 80s versus black cops today, and of course, former Commander Glenn Evans came up, and Pat Hill, who I think everybody knows Pat, said that there's this tremendous dichotomy in the black community where some people say, yeah, we need somebody tough on crime, tough on our people like Glenn.
Like Glenn Evans.
But don't violate my grandson's civil rights. Don't violate my son's civil rights. So I don't think it needs to be as extreme as the things Glenn Evans was accused of.
So
but there has to be more.
It's different today than it was in the 90s. It must be. I mean, I lived here through that, and I don't remember that I was anywhere near as freaked out about it as I am by what's going on today. And I could be wrong about this, but my suspicion has been that so much of it was concentrated in the high rises, in the CHA high rises and so forth. And we could all kind of turn our backs a little bit on it, more than we can turn our backs on it now.
Well, you'd already turn your backs on it because it was a CHA. I mean, because they were high rises. Peter Nicaeus, I interviewed Peter Nicaeus from the Trib and Frank Main from the Sun-Times, and they talked about it. Not only was it different, but there was a different kind of reporting then than we have today. And Frank,
social media.
Well, Frank mentioned misdemeanor murders, and that's the people who you said who weren't innocent. There might not have been a story about them. And so how we cover it is vastly different, and it's personally offensive because it's gotten to be a scorecard. You know, these are people, but it's a scorecard. You look at the Sun-Times and it's numbers, and that's what people talk about. They talk about the numbers, not the humans.
And you know, I was around in the 90s when that was happening, and I was also working at the Tribune at that time. And we took on a project that was called Killing Our Children. And the goal of that project was to do a page-one story on every child that was murdered. And it just grew and grew and grew. And the following year, we did a follow-up on saving our children, where we looked at possible solutions to solve the crime. So clearly, nobody was able to figure out, you know, what happened in the 90s or how to fix it. Because we have the same thing going on now. And Glenn is right. We are approaching it in a different way. Right now, it's all about the numbers. And back then, we handled it very differently. I mean, we wanted to put faces on these kids, and we made an effort to do that.
I think it was the Trib in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, that decided that they would not identify the shooters, because when cops were arresting people, these guys had clips of the articles in their wallets. You know, and that's how they took claim for the shootings.
Well, I only bring that up just because I've been really seriously trying to figure out why this feels different, and it does. And I think coverage is different. That's true. Social media is a big part of it, because now it's everywhere and all your feeds everywhere you go. But it does feel different in some way, and I even wonder sometimes if this isn't, you know, how the demographers talk about population echoes. We have a kind of a population echo going on. We have people who are 20 now who were born in that and are children of that mayhem of the 90s, and maybe they just have never known anything else. I just don't know. Okay, I guess we've talked our way out of this. Speak to Mayor Emanuel. What do you want Mayor Emanuel to say tonight? What do you really want him to say tonight?
What I really want him to say is that that he understands that this is a twofold problem that involves social issues and policing, and that he is going to do whatever it takes and find the money wherever he needs to find it to make sure that both sides of this issue are addressed.
I'll say this for the mayor: it's a tough job he's got there. You know, is completely off the topic, but you know, the guy goes out and finds $400 million to finally solve the problem of all of our busting water mains all over the city. He finds the money, he starts the job, he gets halfway through it, and then finds out that he's poisoning everybody with lead by doing it. And now we need another 400 million or billion five or something to replace all the service. Sometimes you just can't win. I mean,
That's true.
You can't win for
That's
losing.
true.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. These are the kind of conversations that I really like to have. People who've been with this for a long time, who, like we all do, care about our city and want our city to be better. And I'm really happy that Glenn Reedus joined us today, and Dahleen for the first time. I hope you'll come back. I hope you'll come back many, many times. I'm going to leave you with another reading, if you don't mind. This is from July 4th. This is what got me started on, wow, this Dahleen Glanton is really saying some very cool things. In some neighborhoods, parents will not dare to allow their children outside for fear they'll fall victim to the cycle of violence for which there is no pause button. Secretly, all of us will long for the return of a horrid winter. Long for the return of a horrid winter, our only hope for the slightest relief. Because we're convinced that no one can stop the violence, the mayor, not the police, the perpetrators are in so deep they've lost all their sense of being, and certainly not citizens like us. We are too tired, we are too disinvested to try. So I'll sit back and I'll let the violence flow, and others will join me in this peaceful place of ignorant bliss, and together we'll cross our fingers and hope that the shootings somehow stop, or at least stay far away from where we are, though we already know they will not. How can I be so sure? Because this is the city Chicago has become, and these are the kind of people we are. Dahleen Glanton, July 4th of this very year. These are the people we've become. Let's hope not. Let's hope you're not. We're not. Okay? All right. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be back next week with another show. You can watch us anytime by going to this address right here, and there have been some pretty decent shows the last few weeks. Maybe you want to catch up on us. See you next week with another one. Thanks. Bye-bye.